Georg Simmel occupies a unique position in the pantheon of social philosophers, straddling the pivotal transitional period between the 19th and 20th centuries, an era riddled with profound change and burgeoning modernity. His work radiates a complex genius, at once historical and prophetic, rooted in the traditions of classical philosophy while pointing unmistakably towards the dilemmas of contemporary social existence. Despite being overshadowed by contemporaries such as Max Weber and Emil Durkheim, Simmel's thought has recently resurfaced to claim its significance, admired for its acute psychological insight, poetic nuance, and the startling clarity with which it articulates the paradoxes of modern life. Central to Simmel's philosophy is the conviction that modernity introduces unprecedented conditions. Individuals are liberated from the rigid traditional orders, only to find themselves adrift in a sea of fragmentation and ceaseless flux. The metropolitan experience, with all its dazzling stimuli and relentless pace, becomes Simmel's laboratory for observing these seismic shifts. He traces the rise of unprecedented self-consciousness in the urban dweller, as well as the spread of a blasé attitude and the inner tensions born from living in complex social webs. Simmel's essays and lectures, far from presenting rigid systems, offer illuminating fragments, parables of experience, intricate explorations of identity, freedom, and social forms. In contrast to grand structural theories of society, Simmel favored the analysis of the everyday and the marginal, believing that the most significant truths about social existence are to be found in the nuances of daily encounters, money exchange, aesthetic appreciation, and sociability itself. This approach lends his work an enduring relevance. Simmel did not merely diagnose the malaise of his own age. He anticipated the dialectics of freedom and alienation, individuality and conformity that continue to haunt the contemporary world. Chapter 1. The Modern Mind, introducing Georg Simmel. In the annals of social philosophy, few thinkers have approached the phenomenon of modernity with the nuanced attentiveness and subtle artistry of Georg Simmel. Born amidst the shifting sands of late 19th century Germany, Simmel was both a product and a keen observer of his epoch, a time when the rules of human association, tradition, and individuality were being rewritten, not only by grand political upheavals, but by the silent, persistent drift of everyday urban existence. To introduce Georg Simmel is to encounter not just a man of ideas, but an architect of new intellectual forms. Simmel's intellectual odyssey intertwines with the unfolding of modernity itself. As cities swelled with migrants seeking work and anonymity, as technological advancements collapsed ancient boundaries, Simmel's writings provided one of the earliest and most sophisticated analyses of the psychological and social experiences of modern life. He witnessed firsthand the tension between individuality and collectivity, the proliferation of social roles, and the strange sense of freedom that came hand in hand with fragmentation and alienation. Simmel was educated at the University of Berlin, where his interdisciplinary curiosity led him to study philosophy, history, psychology, and eventually what would later be recognized as sociology. His contemporaries often regarded him as the most cosmopolitan and imaginative of German thinkers. Yet his career was hampered by his status as both a Jew and an outsider to the academic establishment. He would not attain a full professorship until late in life, despite his prodigious output and the acclaim of his peers. Simmel's style is at once aphoristic and deeply analytical. He favored essays and lectures, producing a vast corpus that ranged from rigorous philosophical treatises to evocative explorations of everyday topics: love, fashion, the dinner table, and even the role of gossip. In all these works, he displayed a restless, exploratory mind, capable of teasing out the hidden significance of the most trivial-seeming phenomena. Central to Simmel's project was his diagnosis of modernity's double-edged impact. On the one hand, he saw the modern mind cultivated to an unparalleled degree, a flowering of individuality, creativity, and inner differentiation. On the other hand, he was acutely aware of modernity's tendency toward alienation, rootlessness, and a new sort of loneliness that issued from the very networks that bound individuals together. His essays, most famously The Metropolis and Mental Life, articulated the sensory overload and defensive withdrawal that characterized the modern urban psyche. Yet, Simmel was neither an uncritical celebrant nor a reactionary critic of modernity. His perspective is best described as a finely tuned oscillation, a refusal to choose between optimism and pessimism, instead holding both attitudes in productive tension. He was concerned above all with understanding how modern life shaped and was shaped by the human spirit, how the individual navigated the myriad demands of social life, and how society itself was a living aggregate of countless acts of personal negotiation. To introduce Simmel is also to recognize his enduring influence. Many foundational concepts of sociology, from social forms and interactionism to the status of the stranger and the conflicting dynamics of individual and society, bear his imprint. His exploration of money as a social rather than an economic phenomenon prefigured later inquiries in cultural studies and critical theory. Simmel's holistic interdisciplinary method laid the groundwork for generations of thinkers who would seek to understand the intricate totality of modern existence. Thus, Georg Simmel, architect of modern life, begins with the man himself, a thinker who, in attempting to map the mental and social contours of his own age, bequeathed a legacy that remains startlingly relevant to ours. Chapter 2, Berlin and Beyond, the world that shaped Simmel. Georg Simmel's philosophy did not emerge in abstraction, but rather in a world marked by dizzying transformation. The city of Berlin, swarming, expanding, and vibrant, provided both the physical setting and the intellectual crucible in which Simmel's thought took shape. To understand the world that formed Simmel is to appreciate the particular convergence of culture, society, and urban dynamism that Berlin, at the turn of the 20th century, so vividly embodied. Berlin in Simmel's lifetime underwent profound changes. It was not merely a city, it was a symbol of modernity itself. The expansion of industry attracted populations from rural areas, and with them a babel of languages, traditions, and aspirations. Construction boomed, thoroughfares straightened, and the city's urban landscape, notably the grandiose Unter den Linden and the bustling Alexanderplatz, became a theater for the negotiation of social difference, economic exchange, and new forms of public life. Simmel was acutely sensitive to the effects of this urban cauldron. The cacophony of voices, the anonymity of the crowd, and the spectacle of ceaseless movement were not merely backdrops to his theoretical inquiries. They were their generative source. In his explorations of the metropolis, Simmel described how the constant bombardment of sensory stimuli led to what he called the blasé attitude, a psychological adaptation marked by emotional detachment necessary to survive the onslaught of urban impressions. Berlin's cultural scene also shaped Simmel's thinking. The city fostered a dazzling array of artistic, scientific, and intellectual circles, each with its own idiosyncrasies and ambitions. Simmel, who frequented salons and literary gatherings, moved easily among artists, philosophers, and scientists, absorbing the ferment of ideas and debates that characterized Germany's fin de siècle. Here Simmel formulated his conviction that the modern world required new tools of analysis, tools able to grapple with complexity, contradiction, and ceaseless flux. At the same time, Berlin's social stratification and ethnic diversity deeply impressed themselves upon Simmel's consciousness. The city, harboring both staggering wealth and abject poverty, was a microcosm of broader societal tensions. It embodied the paradoxes inherent in the capitalist modernity that Marx and Engels had earlier critiqued. Simmel's notion of social forms, ways in which individuals relate, compete, or cooperate, grew in part out of his observations of Berlin's multifaceted social theatre. Yet, Simmel's gaze extended beyond the city's boundaries. He was profoundly European in sensibility, travelling widely throughout Germany, France, and Italy. These journeys complemented and enriched his thinking, exposing him to a variety of urban experiences, aesthetic traditions, and philosophical discourses that transcended local context. Simmel's knowledge of French sociologists and Italian Renaissance thought, as well as his engagement with English and American pragmatism, marked him as an intellectual cosmopolitan. Simmel was no passive observer. He was himself shaped by, and at times marginalized within, Berlin's society. Born to Jewish parents, he was keenly aware of the social boundaries and exclusions that defined late 19th century German academia. His own position as a semi-outsider lent a unique perspective to his exploration of social distance, alienation, and the stranger phenomenon, ideas that would later reverberate widely in sociological thought. Ultimately, the world that shaped Simmel was a world threaded with promise and peril. Berlin's urban dynamism both excited and unsettled, its social diversity both invigorated and divided. Simmel absorbed these contradictions and sought to render them intelligible, not simply as challenges to be solved, but as constitutive elements of modern life itself. This chapter illuminates how the material, intellectual, and social conditions of Berlin and its environs formed the indispensable matrix of Simmel's thought. In engaging the city's pulse, its pageantry of difference, and its sense of perpetual arrival and departure, Simmel forged a vision that continues to inform and inspire our own responses to the complexities of urban existence. Chapter 3. The Birth of a Sociologist. Between Philosophy and Society, Georg Simmel stands at a unique juncture in the history of ideas, where philosophy and sociology, long separated by disciplinary boundaries, find themselves in a fertile and often turbulent dialogue. His intellectual formation was marked by an abiding commitment to philosophy, a legacy of German idealism, but his restless inquiry would soon propel him toward questions that could only be answered by a new science of society. Simmel's early education at the University of Berlin immersed him in the philosophical traditions of Kant, Hegel, and Schopenhauer. Initially, he aspired to engage in metaphysical speculation, seeking general laws underlying disparate phenomena. However, Simmel soon grew dissatisfied with purely abstract theorizing. The world around him, its cacophony, its unpredictability, its sheer density of social interaction, demanded a more concrete, dynamic, and responsive mode of analysis. Thus began his lifelong attempt to bridge philosophy and the emergent discipline of sociology. His breakthrough came with his work on social forms, patterns of interaction such as conflict, cooperation, fashion, and exchange. Here, Simmel charted a course distinct from the grand systemic models of his contemporaries. Rather than seeking to subsume all human experience under universal laws, Simmel explored the kaleidoscopic variety of social relations, attending to their lived, situational, and often contradictory character. For Simmel, society was not an abstract entity looming over its members, but a web of interactions, each thread uniquely constituted and continually in motion. This approach found powerful expression in the concept of social types. Simmel's best-known figure, the stranger, provided a way of understanding roles that transcend concrete individuals. The stranger is both near and far, participating in the group while remaining outside its intimate bounds. Through such types, Simmel showed how the individual's position vis-à-vis the group shapes both personal identity and social structure. Yet, Simmel's sociological imagination remained deeply philosophical. He was preoccupied with questions of value, meaning, and individuality, classic themes of philosophy now recast in the context of social relations. His examinations of culture, for instance, rejected the view of culture as a mere collection of artifacts or practices. Instead, Simmel conceived of culture as a dynamic process, a movement from subjective experience, the personal, lived world of meaning, toward objective forms, art, science, institutions, and back again. Simmel's dual commitments are evident in his writing style. His essays move fluidly between conceptual analysis and empirical observation, between the micro-world of subjective feeling and the vast structures of social life. He likened his method to that of the Impressionist painter, capturing the fleeting impressions, the play of light and shadow, the spontaneity that characterizes the modern scene. Institutionally, Simmel's contributions were not immediately recognized. The German university system of the late 19th century privileged system builders and disciplinarians, whereas Simmel's work, transdisciplinary, fragmentary, and frequently informal, often fell between the cracks. Despite these obstacles, Simmel lectured widely, attracting a devoted following among students and the urban intelligentsia. His courses ranged from ethics and aesthetics to logic and history of philosophy, also fused with a concern for the ineluctable realities of social life. The birth of Simmel as a sociologist, therefore, should not be conceived as a simple transition from one discipline to another. It was instead a creative confluence, a reciprocal transformation whereby philosophy imbued sociology with depth and reflexivity, even as the emergent social sciences opened philosophy to the texture of the real. In Simmel's hands, the study of society became a philosophical act, and vice versa. The legacy of this synthesis is far-reaching. Simmel anticipated the methodological pluralism of later generations, encouraging future thinkers not to be content with rigid boundaries, but to embrace the fluidity and ambiguity of human life. He showed that the richest understanding of society emerges not from abstraction or system, but from an open, dialogical engagement with the manifold forms of living together. In so doing, Simmel established himself as not only a founder of sociology, but as a philosopher of society, one who revealed the possibilities and perils at the heart of modern existence. Chapter 4. Understanding Modernity. Life in the Metropolis. Few thinkers have scrutinized the experience of modernity as closely as Georg Simmel. Among his most influential contributions is his probing analysis of life in the metropolis, notably articulated in his classic essay, The Metropolis and Mental Life. This seminal work remains essential for understanding how urban environments both shape and challenge the individual, generating new patterns of consciousness and interaction. The transformation wrought by the growth of great cities like Berlin marked an epochal shift in the human condition. Simmel observed that in pre-modern societies, stable communities and face-to-face interactions were the norm. The rhythms of village and family life cultivated personal intimacy and emotional depth. By contrast, the modern metropolis, a space of unending movement, diversity, and novelty, upended established forms of association. Here the individual is bombarded by an incessant flow of impressions, the din of traffic, the glare of advertisements, the passing of strangers, and the relentless pace of business. Simmel's exploration of the metropolitan mind reveals the psychological consequences of this urban environment. The city dweller, he argued, develops a blasé attitude, a protective indifference to the overwhelming stimuli of the metropolis. This attitude is not merely an affectation, it is a functional adaptation, a shield against sensory overload. Yet it comes at a cost, for it can dull emotional responsiveness and heighten feelings of isolation. Nonetheless, Simmel did not present urban life as purely destructive. On the contrary, he celebrated the intellectual and personal opportunities afforded by city life. The metropolitan environment, precisely because of its diversity and unpredictability, encourages the cultivation of individuality. Freed from the oppressive scrutiny and conformity of small communities, city dwellers can experiment with new roles, styles, and identities. The metropolis thus becomes, paradoxically, both a crucible of alienation and a laboratory for self-creation. Simmel further analyzed the forms of social interaction prevailing in the metropolis: fleeting encounters, professionalization, and the growing separation between public and private spheres. Money, as the dominant medium of exchange, symbolized and facilitated the impersonality of modern relationships. In this world, social ties are often mediated by calculation and utility rather than by affective warmth or communal solidarity. Yet, Simmel was attuned to the resilience of sociability even in the harsh air of the modern city. He was fascinated by voluntary associations, clubs, circles, and societies that created new spaces for meaningful connection. He also saw promise in the urban aesthetic, where the dynamism and plurality of city life gave birth to novel artistic and cultural forms. To understand the metropolis, for Simmel, is to grasp the dialectical character of modernity itself. Modern life is characterized by both liberation and fragmentation, by expanding possibilities and new kinds of psychological strain. Yet, he insisted, such tensions are not simply obstacles to be overcome. They are constitutive of the modern spirit. Out of the chaos and contradictions of urban existence, new forms of selfhood and association emerge. Simmel's analysis remains acutely relevant to our own time. As cities continue to grow, and as digital networks extend the logic of the metropolis into new realms, his insights invite us to reconsider our assumptions about urban life, not as a wasteland of estrangement, but as a site of enduring struggle, creativity, and transformation. Thus, Simmel's diagnosis of modernity, far from being a lament, is a call to recognize and respond to the challenges and potentials of city living. Chapter 5, The Tragedy of Culture. When ideas outgrow their creators, Georg Simmel's reflections on modernity culminated in one of his most profound and enduring contributions, the theory of the tragedy of culture. In this formulation, Simmel diagnosed a dilemma at the very heart of human creativity, a dialectic between the vitality of individual subjectivity and the expanding realm of objective culture. Through this lens, Simmel offered a unique account of the tensions inherent in the growth of knowledge and the evolution of civilization. Simmel distinguished between subjective culture, the creative energies, experiences and understandings of individuals, and objective culture, the cumulative body of externalized products. Art, science, technology, social institutions, and belief systems. In the early stages of cultural development, these two dimensions stand in productive relation. Individuals express themselves through the creation of objective forms, which in turn nourish and shape subjective experience as society becomes more complex. However, objective culture begins to outstrip subjective culture. The products of creativity, the works of art, scholarly disciplines, legal codes, take on a life of their own, expanding far beyond the comprehension or mastery of any single individual. Simmel saw in this development a paradox. Culture, originally intended to enrich personal life, now becomes estranged from its creators. The work of genius, he argued, is increasingly subsumed under impersonal structures, so that the individual risks becoming a passive consumer or mere cog within a vast machinery of knowledge. This tragedy of culture does not imply an inevitable decline of civilization, but rather a persistent structural tension. The modern individual, Simmel suggested, is caught between the aspiration for self-expression and the daunting immensity of objective forms. Even as educational and technological advancements proliferate, the sense of personal creativity can easily be stifled or overwhelmed. Simmel's analysis resonates in domains as varied as art, education, and technology. In the realm of academia, for example, the exponential growth of specialized fields renders it virtually impossible for any scholar to master more than a narrow slice of human knowledge. Similarly, in the arts, innovation is frequently hemmed in by the expectations set by museums, canons, and markets. Yet Simmel did not view this development purely with despair. He recognized that the expansion of objective culture also brings previously unimaginable resources to individuals. The task, as he saw it, was to sustain a dynamic relationship between subjectivity and objectivity, to find ways of appropriating cultural forms in the service of renewed personal meaning. This vision of culture as a dialectical process influenced subsequent thinkers, notably in the Frankfurt School, where Adorno and Horkheimer would elaborate further on the alienating potentials of cultural production. Simmel's perspective remains vital today, as debates continue about the promise and peril of mass culture, digital technology, and educational specialization. To see the tragedy of culture, for Simmel, is not to resign oneself to cultural impotence. Rather, it is to recognize the challenge posed by the ever-growing world of objective forms, to reclaim, within a world overflowing with meanings, the possibility of genuine selfhood, creation, and understanding. In this way, Simmel's tragedy is also a call to action, to engage with, transform, and make our own the culture that so often threatens to outpace us. Chapter 6: The Philosophy of Money, Value, Exchange, and Human Connection. At the heart of Georg Simmel's intellectual legacy lies his magnum opus, The Philosophy of Money. In this ambitious work, Simmel interrogates not only the economic significance of money, but also its profound impact on human relationships, perception, and modern social structures. More than a treatise on currency, Simmel's analysis unfolds as a philosophical investigation into the mysteries of value, the transformations wrought by exchange, and the shifting nature of human connection in modern life. For Simmel, money is not simply a neutral means of transaction. It is a cultural form that shapes the mental and emotional fabric of individuals and societies. He posits that value itself emerges through processes of interaction and differentiation. Nothing possesses inherent worth. Instead, value is constituted by the distance between desire and attainment, by the act of evaluating and the relational dynamics it entails. An object's value is not absolute, but an outcome of negotiation, scarcity, and the effort required to obtain it. Exchange, in Simmel's view, is the quintessential social act. Whenever individuals negotiate terms, they enter a web of reciprocity and recognition, in effect, enacting the foundational processes of association. Money, as the universal equivalent, abstracts this relationship, enabling an unprecedented expansion of possibilities. It dissolves the constraints of barter, standardizing and quantifying diverse forms of wealth. Yet herein lies a paradox. As money universalizes exchange, it reduces personal intimacy and uniqueness. The warm glow of face-to-face barter cools into the impersonal logic of calculation, turning even the most sacred of human exchanges, time, affection, loyalty, into commodities potentially subject to monetary valuation. Thus, Simmel asserts, money introduces both liberation and alienation. On one hand, it grants individuals the ability to transcend local and particularistic bonds. The money economy empowers autonomy, furnishing individuals with the means to choose, to purchase from a multitude of options, and to establish themselves within broad, impersonal networks. On the other hand, this very expansion erodes the depth of connection. The proliferation of choice and abstraction breeds a certain emotional distance, a blasé attitude in metropolitan life, where overstimulation encourages the withdrawal of affect. Simmel also considers how money mediates social relationships. In pre-monetary societies, obligation, debt, and gift-giving bound people in dense, emotionally laden ties. The introduction of monetary exchange standardizes these interactions, substituting precise amounts for ambiguous feelings, allowing obligations to be discharged objectively. While this offers clarity and simplicity, it may also dissolve the webs of moral duty that underpin social cohesion. Moreover, Simmel identifies the peculiar freedom that money bestows, the ability to maintain objective relationships, unclouded by subjective or sentimental entanglement. Money allows for a form of sociability that is both liberating and anonymous. In commerce, individuals can interact across boundaries of class, creed, and culture, yet these interactions are often stripped of deeper personal significance. Most significantly, Simmel's analysis uncovers the paradoxes of modern subjects. Money amplifies individual autonomy, but also subjects people to a regime of constant comparison, calculation, and competition. The modern individual, awash in opportunities for consumption, is nonetheless beset by the pressures of standardization and the loss of rootedness in authentic communities. Despite these critical insights, Simmel does not propose a simplistic binary of degradation or improvement. Rather, he insists that the money economy is ambivalent, compressing both gains and losses within its logic. What is gained in freedom may be lost in intimacy. What is secured in objectivity may be drained of warmth. Ultimately, Simmel's philosophy of money is a meditation on the nature of value itself, recasting economic phenomena as windows into the soul of modernity. In the circuits of exchange and the abstractions of financial calculation, Simmel discerns a drama of desire, estrangement, and the elusive quest for meaning that persists even as the world is rendered ever more quantifiable. Chapter 7. The Stranger, a new vision of social distance. Among Georg Simmel's most influential concepts is that of the stranger. In his essay by the same name, Simmel develops a nuanced exploration of social distance, examining how the position of the outsider is at once marginal and central to the group. Simmel's portrayal of the stranger is not that of a transient visitor, but of a person who is, in a paradoxical sense, both near and far, present yet fundamentally different. Simmel begins by contrasting the stranger with other figures who pass through a group but do not become part of it. The stranger, by contrast, comes today and stays tomorrow. They are integrated into the group's activities and routines, participate in its life, yet always in a certain sense remain apart. The quintessential example Simmel provides is the trader or merchant, someone who comes from elsewhere, possessing goods, practices, or ideas foreign to the local context, yet who establishes a position of lasting participation. This marginality is not merely spatial or geographical, it is existential. The stranger inhabits a unique social role, embodying both the possibility of new perspectives and the reality of persistent boundaries. They are trusted with confidences because, paradoxically, their outsider status renders them neutral and impartial. At the same time, the stranger's presence underscores the limitations of group membership, highlighting who belongs and who does not. Simmel's analysis of the stranger exposes the latent structures of inclusion and exclusion that shape communal life. The stranger is never fully assimilated, yet is indispensable. They are the bearer of difference, the vehicle for exchange, and often the agent of innovation. Groups may rely on strangers for goods, services, or knowledge unavailable within the community, and in turn, the stranger's very strangeness becomes a source of both fascination and suspicion. From this vantage point, Simmel extends his analysis to the broader phenomena of urban societies. In the densely populated metropolis, individuals are routinely cast into the role of the stranger, anonymous, disconnected, and often unremarked. The city dweller moves among countless others while retaining a protective shell of reserve. The constant proximity of strangers becomes routine, fostering both indifference and a peculiar form of social harmony based on mutual non-interference. Moreover, Simmel's concept of the stranger invites reflection on issues of identity, migration, and cosmopolitanism. In the age of global movement, millions navigate the ambiguities of belonging and estrangement. The stranger's dual status, simultaneously inside and outside, mirrors the predicament of the modern individual. Connected to myriad networks yet fundamentally alone, Simmel does not romanticize the stranger's plight. Their neutrality can become isolation, their unique perspective a burden. Yet he recognizes the stranger's vital role in renewing societies. The presence of the outsider forces a group to face the limits of its own perspective, to redefine its boundaries, and to test its capacity for openness and adaptability. In trade, intellectual life, or cultural exchange, the stranger invigorates group life by interrupting routine and introducing novelty. In sum, Simmel's theory of the stranger illuminates the deeper currents of social distance, those invisible lines that both separate and connect. The figure of the stranger represents the perpetual tension between likeness and difference, unity and division that is at the heart of all social life. Through understanding the dynamic presence of the stranger, we gain insight into the evolving shape of modernity itself, where boundaries are constantly redrawn, and the dance between inclusion and exclusion perpetually recommences. Chapter 8: Individual versus Society, the conflict within modern man. Few thinkers have dissected the predicament of modern individualism with the subtlety and depth of Georg Simmel. For Simmel, the conflict between the individual and society is not a static confrontation, but a dynamic, ever-shifting dialectic, an ongoing tension inscribed within the very fabric of modern life. This conflict is not merely a philosophical abstraction, but the lived reality of modern man, as Simmel envisaged him, torn between the craving for autonomy and the inescapable web of social obligations. Simmel's analysis begins with the recognition that individuality has itself become a distinct historical and cultural value, a key element of the modern worldview. In traditional societies, personal identity was largely prescribed. One's role, function, and relationships were dictated by kinship, locality, custom, and religious mandate. Modernity, by contrast, privileges self-determination and authenticity. The modern subject is encouraged to cultivate a unique sense of self, to pursue desires and preferences independent of collective dictates. However, this quest for individuality unfolds within a landscape ever more saturated by social forms, institutions, and expectations. The expansion of the division of labor, bureaucratic structures, mass media, and the logic of the market all exert powerful pressures toward standardization. The individual, Simmel observes, is caught in the paradox of being ever more unique yet ever more replaceable, able to express distinctiveness, while simultaneously subjected to the leveling force of mass society. Simmel illustrates this conflict through his analysis of urban life. In the metropolis, individuals are bombarded by stimuli, exposed to myriad opportunities for self-expression, and presented with a dizzying array of social types and life pathways. Yet these very freedoms occasion new anxieties. The pressure to be original produces not only richness, but also restlessness and insecurity. The search for approval, recognition, and belonging does not vanish. Rather, it mutates into subtler forms, evidenced by the chase for status and distinction within ever-proliferating social hierarchies. This tension is encapsulated in Simmel's notion of the tragedy of culture. As individuals create objective cultural forms, art, science, law, technology, these constructs achieve an existence and autonomy independent of their originators. Over time, culture comes to confront individuals as an alien force, demanding mastery, acquisition, or conformity. The products of individual creativity thus threaten to subjugate their very creators. Simmel acknowledges that this struggle is not purely negative. The friction between self and society spurs creativity, innovation, and moral development. Autonomy is won precisely by negotiating with, and at times resisting, the claims of the collective. The individual must both join and transcend the group, carving out a space for selfhood while remaining embedded in social networks. Furthermore, Simmel insists that individuality is relational, not absolute. True individuality arises only within the context of social differentiation, through the interplay of similarity and contrast, conformity and deviation. To be recognized as unique presupposes the existence of a collective standard, against which distinctiveness can be measured and appreciated. Simmel's analysis culminates in the suggestion that the modern condition is one of ambivalence. The pursuit of autonomy generates solidarity and estrangement. The longing for freedom entails the acceptance of limitation. Modern man, Simmel concludes, must learn to inhabit this tension creatively, finding sources of meaning and identity in the very interplay of forces that threaten to dissolve them. In this way, Simmel invites us to reconsider the conflict of individual and society, not as an impasse, but as the generative core of modern experience, requiring from each person a continual balancing act, a negotiation of belonging and difference, and an ongoing commitment to the possibilities of selfhood amid the demands of the social world. Chapter 9, The Art of Interaction, How People Shape Each Other. The essence of social life in Simmel's account is interaction. Far from being a passive background interaction, the endless flow of encounters, dialogues, conflicts, and cooperations constitutes the living tissue of society. For Simmel, sociation, Vergesellschaftung, refers not simply to formal institutions, but to the artful, dynamic process by which individuals come together, influence one another, and jointly construct the contours of shared experience. Central to this vision is the recognition that society is not an entity over and above its members, but a pattern of relations enacted through myriad acts of mutual adjustment. Whether in fleeting exchanges or sustained associations, individuals are both shaped by, and in turn shape, those with whom they interact. The social world is thus a ceaseless process of negotiation, weaving an intricate web that extends from intimate dyads, the relation of two people, to sprawling collectives. Simmel's analysis pays particular attention to the forms and consequences of these interactions. He identifies a palette of fundamental social forms: competition, exchange, conflict, subordination, cooperation, secrecy, and more, that underlie a vast diversity of content. What matters most are not the specific goals or interests at play, but the patterns of connection and differentiation that emerge. Take, for example, the phenomenon of conflict. For Simmel, conflict is not simply a breakdown of association, but a form of interaction that clarifies differences, catalyzes new solidarities, and can even reinforce group unity by delineating internal boundaries. Similarly, exchange, be it economic, emotional, or intellectual, enacts reciprocity, creating bonds of obligation and recognition that are foundational to social cohesion. Simmel's treatment of secrecy is especially notable. Secrecy, he argues, is a potent tool in shaping social relationships, allowing individuals and groups to regulate intimacy, trust, and power. The distinction between what is shared and what is concealed is intrinsic to the maintenance of boundaries, the navigation of hierarchies, and the crafting of personal and collective identities. Underlying these forms is a deeper philosophical insight. Social relationships are never static. Their form and meaning shift according to context, duration, and the intentions of the participants. The same relationship may oscillate between cooperation and conflict, dominance and submission, transparency and opacity. The outcome of interaction is rarely predictable or permanent. Simmel likens social interaction to the work of an artist, an ongoing creation in which each participant is both author and subject, shaping and being shaped in tandem. Everyday encounters, from a passing greeting to a complex negotiation, are thus sites of creativity, tension, and transformation. Moreover, Simmel's focus on interaction directs attention to the small-scale, often overlooked rituals of daily life. Routine gestures, language, rituals of politeness, and even bodily comportment serve as vital infrastructure for sociation. Through repeated patterned interactions, expectations are stabilized, trust is built, and the social order is rendered intelligible, even amid change or crisis. Yet Simmel also warns of the dangers of routinization and impersonality, particularly in the metropolis. When interaction becomes reduced to mechanical formulae, the depth and richness of mutual shaping risk are lost. The challenge of modern life, then, is to maintain the artfulness of association against the pressures of standardization and anonymity. In sum, Simmel's theory of interaction reminds us that society is less a thing than a process, ever unfinished, ever in flux, dependent on the artistry of its participants. To understand how people shape one another is to appreciate the subtle dance of difference and unity, innovation and tradition, openness and reserve that characterizes all social life. Chapter 10. Simmel on Fashion, Identity, Conformity and Expression. Within the kaleidoscope of modern cultural phenomena, fashion occupies a privileged position in Georg Simmel's analysis. For Simmel, fashion is neither trivial nor merely ornamental. Rather, it is a profound expression of the tension between individuality and conformity, self-expression and social belonging, core themes that animate his broader sociology. Simmel's approach to fashion begins by recognizing its dual character. On the one hand, fashion provides a means by which individuals can differentiate themselves, displaying taste, creativity, or status through distinct choices of dress, manners, or consumption. On the other hand, fashion is inherently imitative, requiring the alignment of individuals with a collective style, a shared norm that is disseminated through social groups. This duality animates fashion as a dynamic and ever-evolving process. New styles generate interest precisely because they are novel, yet their appeal depends on their uptake by a wider circle. In this sense, fashion is always in motion. As soon as a trend becomes too widely adopted, losing its distinctive cachet, it is replaced by another. The rhythm of fashion is thus one of a continual cycle. Innovation quickly begets imitation, leading in turn to the search for new forms of distinction. Simmel identifies fashion as a quintessentially modern phenomenon, arising in societies where individualization is pronounced and the desire for social mobility is strong. In aristocratic and traditional societies, clothing and style were largely static, prescribed by birth, occupation, or custom. With the rise of the bourgeoisie and the expansion of cities, fashion assumed new significance as a vehicle for aspiration, comparison, and identity-making among increasingly mobile populations. Crucially, Simmel sees fashion as both a liberating and constraining force. It enables actors to signal belonging, to declare affiliation with a particular milieu, generation, or class, while simultaneously offering a platform for modest acts of resistance or differentiation. The choice of a particular garment, accessory, or demeanor can serve as a subtle declaration of uniqueness amid the pressures of conformity. Yet, Simmel warns, the quest for individuation through fashion is inherently unstable. What is intended as a mark of distinction is destined to be appropriated, absorbed by the mass, and thus devalued as a sign of individuality. The fashion cycle thus mirrors the larger modern predicament, the ceaseless quest for identity amid the forces of standardization and commercialization. Moreover, Simmel highlights the performative dimension of fashion. How one appears and is perceived becomes an integral part of social interaction. Through fashion, individuals negotiate the gaze of others, managing impressions and conveying signals, often unconsciously, about taste, values, status, and aspirations. In a sense, fashion becomes a kind of symbolic language, articulating meanings that are not reducible to mere material or utilitarian considerations. In a contemporary perspective, Simmel's analysis anticipates many themes of later cultural criticism: the commodification of difference, the politics of representation, and the anxiety of authenticity. Fashion for Simmel is at once playful and serious, shallow and profound, the visual shorthand for the deep and perpetual dialectic of self and other at the heart of modernity. Ultimately, Simmel's sociology of fashion compels us to reflect on our own practices of dress, appearance and consumption, not as trivial matters, but as sites where the drama of identity, conformity and resistance is enacted every day. Chapter 11. The Role of the Artist, Beauty and Freedom in Society. Simmel's meditation on art and the artist forms a crucial axis of his philosophical contemplation, offering a lens through which to understand the interplay of beauty and freedom in modern society. In a world increasingly defined by abstraction and instrumental reason, the artist emerges, in Simmel's view, as a figure capable of disrupting normative constraints and envisioning alternative modes of existence. For Simmel, art is more than mere aesthetic pleasure. It is a manifestation of human vitality, a way in which life transcends utility and asserts itself against the mechanical pressures of modernization. The act of artistic creation, he posits, embodies freedom, not simply as liberation from external constraints, but as the assertion of an inner necessity, the unfolding of personal vision against the backdrop of collective norms. The artist, in this sense, functions as a social outsider and innovator, charting new aesthetic territories and challenging prevailing categories of perception. Beauty, for Simmel, does not exist in a vacuum. It arises out of the dynamic relationship between form and content, individual and society. The artist's ability to craft beauty lies in the capacity to reconcile discordant elements, to harmonize subjective impulse and objective principle. This creative synthesis grants art its transformative potential, as it draws the beholder into a heightened awareness of existence. Every artwork, Simmel suggests, is a microcosm of society, reflecting its tensions, possibilities, and aspirations. At the societal level, the presence of the artist and aesthetic activity becomes a means of humanizing life. In an era where the division of labor fosters specialization and monotony, art reminds individuals of their creative faculties and their inherent capacity for self-expression. Through beauty, society can cultivate sensibility, empathy, and a deeper engagement with the lived world. Simmel's reflections also interrogate the social position of the artist. Often viewed with suspicion or regarded as a marginal figure, the artist's struggle for freedom mirrors the broader quest for autonomy within society. By challenging conventions and proposing novel forms of communication, artists expose the limitations of established norms and expand the horizon of possibilities. Their role, therefore, is not merely decorative or escapist. Instead, it is fundamentally transformative. In the context of modernity, where alienation and atomization threaten to erode the richness of experience, art serves as a counterforce. It re-enchants the world, restoring meaningful connections between individuals, objects, and ideas. Simmel's advocacy for art underscores its ethical dimension. Beauty is not simply an adornment, but a vital force that shapes the contours of social life and nurtures individuality. Simmel's nuanced understanding of the artist and beauty provides a compelling framework for assessing the place of art in contemporary society. By foregrounding the creative act as a space of freedom and meaning, Simmel invites us to reflect on our own capacity for innovation and transcendence in the face of modernity's challenges. Chapter 12. Religion and Meaning, Searching for the Sacred in the Secular. The spiritual quest for meaning remains central to human life, even as modernity ushers in an era of secularization and rationalization. Simmel's analysis of religion and the search for the sacred confronts the paradoxical experience of a society at once liberated from, and yet haunted by, transcendent longings. Simmel approaches religion not as a system of dogma, but as an existential disposition, a way of orienting oneself towards the ultimate dimensions of existence. For him, the religious impulse is rooted in the irrepressible human yearning for wholeness, unity, and significance. Even as institutional religions wane under the weight of scientific rationality, the desire for the sacred persists, finding new forms of expression in art, philosophical reflection, and everyday practices. The process of secularization, according to Simmel, does not eradicate the need for meaning. Rather, it displaces and transmutes religious energies into novel domains. The experience of the sacred becomes diffused across various spheres of life, from intimate relationships to creative pursuits. The search for spiritual depth endures, manifesting as a kind of religious sensibility that pervades ostensibly secular contexts. Simmel's philosophy of religion is marked by an acute awareness of the limits of rationality. He contends that the sacred cannot be entirely apprehended through intellectual abstraction or scientific analysis. Instead, it is encountered through participation in rituals, symbols, and aesthetic experiences that evoke awe, mystery, and transcendence. Religion thus becomes a vehicle for expressing and negotiating the tensions between the finite and the infinite, the temporal and the eternal. In the shadow of secularism, Simmel discerns the emergence of new religions, movements and ideologies that seek to restore a sense of purpose and belonging. These include heightened devotion to art, nature, or humanity, commitments to political causes, and the cultivation of personal ideals. Each of these substitutes reflects the enduring need to sacralize experience and to anchor life in something larger than the self. Simmel's reflections on religion also highlight its social dimension. Religious communities provide frameworks for solidarity, ethical guidance, and the negotiation of existential anxieties. Even in its secularized forms, the collective search for meaning binds individuals together, offering comfort and direction amidst the fragmentation of modern life. Ultimately, Simmel suggests that the sacred is not a relic of the past, but a living presence in contemporary society. It animates the quest for authenticity and depth, demanding that individuals and communities grapple with the fundamental questions of existence. Through his nuanced analysis, Simmel invites us to reconsider the boundaries between religion and secular life, urging us to recognize the spiritual aspects that persist at the heart of modern experience. Chapter 13. Love, Conflict, and Reciprocity. The Dynamics of Human Bonds. At the heart of Simmel's social philosophy lies a subtle exploration of human relationships, the delicate dance of attraction, tension, and mutual recognition that structures society. His inquiry into love, conflict, and reciprocity constitutes a major contribution to understanding the dynamics of human bonds in an age marked by both heightened individuality and increasing social complexity. Love, for Simmel, is not merely a private passion, but a social phenomenon that reveals the interplay between self and other. In loving relationships, individuals confront the paradox of intimacy and autonomy. Love brings persons together, fostering a sense of unity and shared purpose, even as it preserves the distinctiveness of each participant. Simmel argues that genuine love is rooted in freedom, a voluntary act of giving and receiving, wherein both parties maintain their individuality while co-creating meaning. Conflict. in Simmel's framework, is not antagonistic per se, but an essential and creative component of social life. Disagreement and struggle, rather than undermining solidarity, serve to clarify differences, stimulate innovation, and forge deeper connections. Simmel's seminal theory of social conflict contends that opposition generates energy and change, obliging individuals to negotiate, adapt, and reaffirm their bonds. The resolution or management of conflict results in the strengthening of relationships, as adversaries recognize each other's perspectives and strive for reconciliation. Reciprocity is the underlying principle that sustains social interaction, encompassing both acts of love and moments of conflict. Simmel views reciprocity as the motor of society, compelling individuals to respond to one another's actions, to balance giving and receiving, and to construct shared realities. Through reciprocal exchanges, individuals affirm their interconnectedness and contribute to the ongoing creation of social order. The dynamics of human bonds, as elucidated by Simmel, extend well beyond the dyad. They permeate families, communities, and societies. He pays particular attention to how modernity restructures intimacy, fostering new forms of association and estrangement. Urban life, with its anonymity and mobility, both expands the possibilities for connection and magnifies the risks of isolation. Love and conflict are reframed within the context of heightened diversity and rapid change, posing novel challenges to the maintenance of reciprocity. Simmel's insights prompt a re-evaluation of the ethics of relationships. They assert the irreducible significance of encounter, dialogue, and recognition in shaping the quality of social existence. By emphasizing the transformative power of love, the generative capacity of conflict, and the necessity of reciprocity, Simmel offers a blueprint for navigating the complexities of human bonds in the modern world. Chapter 14, Simmel and Nietzsche, Freedom, Power, and Individuality. Simmel's intellectual engagement with the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche constitutes a fascinating dialogue about the nature of freedom, the exercise of power, and the prospects for individuality in modern life. While both thinkers share a commitment to the critique of conventional norms and the valorization of personal autonomy, their approaches reveal subtle differences regarding the possibilities and limits of self-assertion. Nietzsche's philosophy is famously characterized by the concept of the will to power, the drive toward self-overcoming, and the affirmation of life in the face of nihilism. Simmel adopts and adapts this idea, recognizing its relevance to the challenge of forging individuality within an increasingly impersonal society. He is drawn to Nietzsche's celebration of creativity, spontaneity, and the refusal of conformity. For Simmel, individuality is not merely a static attribute, but a dynamic accomplishment, continually achieved through acts of self-definition and resistance to external pressures. However, Simmel remains wary of the excesses of Nietzschean radicalism. He argues that the pursuit of absolute autonomy can lead to isolation, narcissism, or the loss of the relational basis of selfhood. True freedom, for Simmel, consists in the balance between independence and engagement, between asserting one's uniqueness and participating in the life of the community. Power, similarly, is not the domination of others, but the capacity to shape one's environment, to influence without coercion, and to foster mutual empowerment. Simmel's exploration of freedom involves an acute awareness of the constraints imposed by modern social structures, bureaucracy, technology, and mass culture. These forces threaten to homogenize experience and erode individuality. The challenge, he contends, is to cultivate spaces of personal expression and creativity within an environment often indifferent or hostile to uniqueness. Here, Simmel's emphasis on art, philosophy, and dialogue emerges as a strategy for resisting assimilation and preserving the integrity of the self. The encounter between Simmel and Nietzsche is also a dialogue about the metaphysical foundations of individuality. Nietzsche's Übermensch represents an ideal of self-transcendence, a figure who embodies the highest possibilities of human freedom. Simmel, while sympathetic to this vision, remains more attuned to the everyday realities of social life. He seeks to ground individuality in concrete interactions, in the ethical commitment to reciprocity, and in the aesthetic cultivation of experience. In sum, Simmel's conversation with Nietzsche produced a nuanced model of freedom and individuality suitable for the complexities of modern existence. It insists on the necessity of personal autonomy, while recognizing the indispensable role of social relations and ethical responsibility. Through this synthesis, Simmel offers a compelling framework for understanding the possibilities of human development in an era marked by both unprecedented liberty and pervasive constraint. Chapter 15: Urban Alienation, the Psychological Cost of Modern Life. Modern cities, for Simmel, are laboratories of the new social order, places where the speed, scale, and complexity of life reach their zenith. In his celebrated essay on the metropolis and mental life, Simmel dissects the psychological ramifications of urbanization, revealing how city life engenders unprecedented forms of alienation and estrangement. Urban alienation, in Simmel's analysis, arises from the fragmentation of experience and the relentless pace of change. The metropolitan environment, teeming with stimuli, bombards individuals with impressions and demands constant adaptation. To cope, inhabitants develop a blasé attitude, a protective indifference that shields them from overload but simultaneously dulls their capacity for emotional engagement. This defensive posture leads to detachment, superficiality, and an erosion of meaningful connection. The anonymity of urban life exacerbates the sense of isolation. Relationships become impersonal and transactional, governed by money and calculation rather than intimacy and trust. Simmel notes that the division of labor, while efficient, fosters specialization at the expense of the holistic development of personality. Individuals are reduced to their functions, losing sight of the wider horizon of communal belonging. Yet Simmel does not regard urban alienation as wholly negative. He discerns within it an ambivalent potential. The city, by loosening the bonds of tradition and exposing individuals to diversity, fosters autonomy, creativity, and the possibility of self-invention. The challenge is to navigate the dual pressures of freedom and anonymity, to carve out spaces of meaning within the flux of metropolitan life. Simmel's reflections on urban existence reveal the dialectical character of modern psychological experience. Alienation is both a symptom of fragmentation and a catalyst for new forms of connection. The city becomes a crucible where individuality is forged amidst the tumult of crowds, and where the search for authenticity acquires renewed urgency. By elucidating the psychological costs of urbanization, Simmel invites us to reflect on the conditions of modern life and to seek strategies for mitigating alienation. His insights remain vitally relevant for contemporary debates about urbanism, mental health, and the future of community in an era of rapid change. Chapter 16: Philosophy of Life, Beyond Rationalism and Mechanism. The philosophy of life, as articulated by Simmel, represents a radical departure from the prevailing paradigms of rationalism and mechanism. For Simmel, life is not reducible to abstract formulas or mechanical processes. It is a dynamic, creative force that transcends calculation and invites holistic understanding. Simmel's critique of rationalism centers on its tendency to fragment experience, to subject the richness of life to rigid categories and logical constraints. He contends that reason alone cannot account for the spontaneity, diversity, and unpredictability that characterize living phenomena. The mechanistic worldview, similarly, fails to capture the inner vitality of existence. It reduces individuals to cogs in a social machine, ignoring the irreducible uniqueness of each person. Instead, Simmel advocates for a philosophy that affirms the primacy of life as a source of meaning and value. Life, in his view, is a process of continual becoming, a ceaseless interplay of forces, forms, and relationships. This emphasis on dynamism enables a more nuanced appreciation of individuality, creativity, and the ethical dimensions of existence. Simmel's philosophy of life is also marked by a sensitivity to the limits of knowledge. He recognizes that no single perspective can exhaust the multiplicity of the world, and that understanding requires openness to ambiguity, contradiction, and change. This epistemological humility underpins his advocacy for dialogue, pluralism, and the cultivation of holistic sensibility. At the heart of Simmel's vision is the idea that meaning arises not from static essences, but from lived engagement. The creation of value occurs through participation in diverse spheres: art, religion, love, and community. By foregrounding the experiential character of life, Simmel challenges us to rethink our relationship to ourselves, to others, and to the world. His critique of rationalism and mechanism, while rooted in the context of early 20th century philosophy, remains prescient today. In an age dominated by technological rationality and systems thinking, Simmel's call for the affirmation of life offers a vital corrective. It urges us to embrace complexity, to celebrate diversity, and to nurture the creative energies that animate existence. Chapter 17, Teaching the Modern Soul. Simmel as educator and thinker. Georg Simmel's role as an educator and public intellectual is integral to his legacy, as he dedicated himself to cultivating the modern soul, the capacity for self-reflection, critical inquiry, and ethical imagination. His approach to education went beyond formal instruction, seeking to nurture the whole person and to prepare individuals for the intricacies of modern social life. Simmel conceived of education as a process of self-formation, grounded in the encounter with diverse perspectives and the development of autonomy. He valued the transmission of knowledge not simply as the delivery of information, but as the enrichment of experience. In his lectures and writings, Simmel aimed to stimulate the intellect, awaken aesthetic sensibility, and foster ethical responsibility. Central to Simmel's pedagogical philosophy is the idea of the educated soul, a personality equipped to navigate the ambiguities and challenges of modernity. He emphasized the importance of dialogue, the clash of ideas, and the exploration of values in shaping character. Education, he argued, should instill not only cognitive skills, but also empathy, creativity, and the capacity for independent judgment. Simmel's teaching was characterized by openness to plurality and a resistance to dogmatism. He encouraged students to interrogate assumptions, to engage with complexity, and to embrace the tension between tradition and innovation. His seminars were renowned for their breadth, encompassing philosophy, sociology, art, and religion, and attracting a wide array of thinkers across disciplines. As a public intellectual, Simmel endeavored to bring philosophical reflection into public discourse, bridging the gap between academic scholarship and everyday life. He addressed audiences both within and beyond the university, articulating the dilemmas of modern existence and proposing strategies for personal and collective flourishing. Simmel's contribution as an educator endures in his commitment to nurturing the critical faculties and ethical sensitivity required by the modern soul. His vision of teaching remains a benchmark for contemporary reflection on the aims and methods of education, reminding us of the indispensable role of intellectual openness and spiritual depth in shaping the future. Chapter 18, Legacy of a Maverick. His impact on sociology and philosophy. The legacy of Georg Simmel stands as a testament to the enduring power of philosophical innovation and sociological imagination. Often regarded as a maverick, Simmel's influence permeates the foundations of modern sociology and philosophy, shaping generations of thinkers who wrestle with the complexities of contemporary life. Simmel's impact on sociology is profound and multifaceted. He pioneered the analysis of social forms, the patterns of interaction that structure everyday existence, from dyads and triads to networks and institutions. His theory of social conflict, his insights into the dynamics of urban life, and his studies of money introduced new paradigms for understanding society. Simmel's work laid the groundwork for the development of micro-sociology and the analysis of everyday life, inspiring figures such as Erving Goffman and Peter Berger. In philosophy, Simmel's explorations of individuality, freedom, and the philosophy of life continue to resonate. His critique of rationalism and mechanism anticipated existential and phenomenological approaches, while his reflections on plurality and dialogue prefigured postmodern themes. Simmel's interdisciplinary method, combining rigorous analysis with literary imagination, expanded the scope of philosophical inquiry and fostered new modes of thought. Simmel's legacy is not confined to theory. It is also found in practice. His commitment to intellectual openness, ethical engagement, and the cultivation of sensibility offers a model for responding to the challenges of the modern world. His ideas have been embraced and adapted across disciplines, informing debates about art, education, urbanism, and the nature of modernity itself. The lasting significance of Simmel's work lies in its invitation to continual reflection and renewal. He challenges us to think beyond inherited categories, to engage with the plurality of existence, and to seek meaning in the midst of flux. His legacy endures as a beacon for those who aspire to understand and transform the conditions of modern life. Chapter 19. The Modern Condition, Living Between. Freedom and Fragmentation. Georg Simmel's philosophical inquiries into the condition of modernity are marked by a fundamental tension: the promise of unprecedented freedom and individuality, and the simultaneous threat of disintegration and isolation. For Simmel, modern life is defined by the breakdown of traditional social bonds and a restructuring of individual consciousness in the face of relentless social, economic, and technological transformation. Far from regarding this shift in unqualifiedly optimistic or pessimistic terms, Simmel sought instead to understand, in all its contradictory detail, the experience of living between freedom and fragmentation. Simmel observed that modern society, particularly as manifested in the urban metropolis, brings with it a radical liberation from historical constraints. The individual, once tethered to rigid familial, occupational, or religious roles, finds new avenues for self-expression and autonomy. Money economy, urban diversity, and the proliferation of social forms allow for a unique dynamism in personal identity. The city, Simmel famously wrote, sets the individual loose, offering a broader range of experiences and choices than ever before possible. Yet this freedom is shadowed by a profound sense of disaggregation. The very structures that guarantee autonomy also give rise to estrangement from community, tradition, and sometimes from one's own sense of self. The metropolis, emblematic of modernity, is not just a physical setting for Simmel, but a psychological and existential crucible. City life bombards the senses. Images, encounters, and information crowd in with unprecedented intensity and tempo. The result, Simmel argued, is the emergence of a particular mental attitude, the blasé outlook. Urban dwellers, faced with a constant barrage of stimuli, cultivate a protective indifference, a demeanor of detachment that shields the individual from sensory overload, but at the cost of emotional depth and engagement. This psychological adaptation is not merely a personal quirk, but a symptom of a broader cultural transformation. Simmel recognized, however, that fragmentation is not without creative possibilities. The breakdown of singular overarching value systems frees individuals to experiment with new forms of life and association. Fragmentation, paradoxically, becomes generative. It allows for the constitution of multiple identities, affiliations, and values. Individuals can participate in a plurality of social worlds, each with its own norms and meanings. Within the labyrinthine complexity of urban life, people find themselves constantly negotiating and reinventing their positions. Yet this very multiplicity of options can generate a sense of rootlessness. Simmel's analysis reveals a modern subject perpetually oscillating between the exhilaration of freedom and the anxiety of being lost amid shattered unities. He likens the modern individual to a stranger, simultaneously insider and outsider, at home, everywhere and nowhere. This image crystallizes the existential paradox of modernity. The drive for autonomy leads to both empowerment and estrangement. For Simmel, the art of living in modernity involves learning to dwell in ambiguity, to embrace the flux without succumbing to disintegration. He warns against both nostalgic retreat into vanished certainties and naive celebration of modern fragmentation. Instead, he proposes a mode of existence attuned to the creative possibilities of in-betweenness. This entails cultivating what Simmel called the art of relating, the skill of fashioning meaning and identity among the fragments, building cohesion not from fixed orders, but from dynamic encounters and connections. In sum, Simmel's account of the modern condition is not merely a sociological diagnosis. It is a philosophical meditation on the possibilities and limits of freedom. By tracing the contours of fragmentation and its effects on the self, Simmel illuminates the challenges inherent to modernity, challenges still relevant in our digital, globalized age. The oscillations he described between autonomy and alienation, differentiation and cohesion, remain central to the experience of living between freedom and fragmentation. Chapter 20. Living in Harmony, Becoming One with Universal Flow. The culmination of living by universal laws is harmony, a state of profound interconnectedness, fluidity and ease, where you become one with the flow of the universe. Harmony is not the passive absence of conflict, but the active, vibrant alignment of your will with higher wisdom. Living in harmony means releasing the compulsion to control every detail, trusting instead in the intelligence that orchestrates all life. It is the dance between intention and surrender, where guidance flows from within and serendipity becomes commonplace. Harmony arises from the continuous practice of the laws thus far described. Gratitude roots you in abundance. Belief empowers your creations. Forgiveness liberates your spirit. Alignment awakens authenticity. Intention sharpens your creative focus. Love binds you to all that is. To cultivate harmony, start with acceptance. Embrace life's ebb and flow, the triumphs and trials, the certainties and mysteries. Trust that every experience, welcome or unwelcome, has a place within the greater tapestry. Resist the urge to judge or label. Instead, seek the lesson or gift contained within. Presence is essential. Harmony cannot be achieved in the past or future. It manifests only in the now. Through mindfulness, meditation, and conscious engagement with your environment, you become attuned to subtle currents guiding your path. Surrender is the final step. Not giving up, but giving over. Relinquish the need for rigid control and allow inspiration, intuition, and unseen hands to support your journey. Paradoxically, it is in surrender that you find true power. The universe works through you, achieving effortlessly what force or struggle could not. Maintain harmony by tending to your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Balance work with rest, solitude with connection, creation with reflection. Regularly realign with your values, adjust your intentions, and renew your devotion to love. In harmony, you become a vessel for grace, a beacon of possibility for others. Life's challenges lose their sting, for you trust in a higher order, orchestrating every detail. Opportunities arrive, relationships deepen, and peace prevails. Living in harmony is the art of co-creation with the universe. As you embody this state, you inspire harmony in your surroundings, rippling outward to uplift the collective. Here, at the pinnacle of universal laws, you discover your rightful place within the cosmic order, not as an isolated fragment, but as an integral note in the music of life. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.